On this episode of What's Going On with Shipping, what's going on with containers? I'm your host, Sal Mercogliano. Welcome to today's episode. The TPM, the Trans-Pacific Maritime Conference, has kicked off in beautiful Long Beach, California, starting on Sunday, March 2nd. It's going on through Wednesday, March 5th. Everybody who's everybody in shipping is in Long Beach. Now, you may notice that I am not in Long Beach. I am still here in my beautiful office in North Carolina, even though it is spring break here at Campbell University. The reason I am not in Long Beach is two. Number one, I have a desk full of papers I have to grade. You don't see them here, but there's a desk full of midterm papers I have to grade. So I got to get that done. Second, I'm a lonely college professor at a very small private college in North Carolina. The registration fee for the TPM conference for a non-shipper is about $3,000. $3,000. That's not flights and hotels to Long Beach. So I am watching from afar the TPM conference. However, there's a lot going on with it, and I want to talk about some of the key stories that came out from the first full day. If you're new to the channel, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell to be alerted about new videos as they come out. Here's the site for the TPM conference. So quite an agenda. Obviously on Sunday, a lot of great things. Really wish I was there on Sunday because they had a golf open, but more importantly, they have the Challenge Cup. They have a regatta and yacht race, something that I would kill for. I love sailing, one of my favorite things. But on Monday, March 3rd, they kicked everything off. There were three opening sessions that I want to talk about. The first was the keynote by former UN Ambassador and National Security Advisor John Bolton. The second was from their CEO series. This is a conversation with Mediterranean Shipping's Soren Toft. MSC is the world's largest container company in the world. And then there was a container shipping lookout, which was a panel discussion, which talked about the volatile 2024 market and what it means for the future. I think those are three great topics to discuss. We'll cover the rest of the TPM conference later this week with a wrap-up video. So President Trump delivered on his threat to hit both Canada and Mexico with sweeping import levies and doubled the existing charge to China. So these new U.S. tariffs, 25% on duties on most Canadian and Mexican imports. The exception is on Canadian petroleum and energy. That's 10%, but a doubling of the tariff proposed to China up to 20%. This is going to apply to roughly $1.5 trillion worth of annual imports. Now, this led to a drop in the stock market on Tuesday morning, with the S&P 500 and Dow dropping 0.8% and the NASDAQ dropping 0.7%. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said this: over the medium term, which is what we're focused on, it's a focus on Main Street. Wall Street's doing great. Wall Street can continue to do fine, but we have a focus on small business and consumers. Tariffs, which bring American import levies to the highest since 1943, could lead to as much as $2,000 in additional cost for U.S. households. Plus, this is just the opening salvo of what may be some more tariffs coming on other countries. Trump has said that he will levy a 25% tariff potentially on the European Union. So obviously, tariffs are going to have a big impact. Unfortunately, nobody knows exactly what the impact of tariffs are. If anyone tells you they do, they don't. It is because how these tariffs are applied. Are they going to be passed on to the consumer? Will the shippers and carriers absorb some of those costs? Some of the tariffs are really weird. Canadian tariffs are going to be really interesting because a lot of Canadian goods, for example, come into the United States to use our transportation system and then go back up into Canada because the trans-Canadian transportation system is not as good. So it's going to be a real interesting question to how this all handles and comes out. So let's go ahead and look at the first of those three stories that took place over at TPM. So here is the report over in the Journal of Commerce. Growing U.S. isolationism threatens global supply chains, according to John Bolton. Trump administration moves to withdraw the U.S. from long-standing alliances and security guarantees, puts global supply chains more at risk, former National Security Advisor and UN Ambassador John Bolton said on Monday. Now, the TPM conference has been doing quite a bit on geopolitics the past couple of years. They have brought in a lot of big name speakers to discuss these issues. We're talking about David Petraeus, talking about Robert Gates. So a lot of people being brought in to discuss this issue at TPM. Bolton is kind of the next in it, and Bolton's obviously an interesting choice. And you talk about a guy who can galvanize a crowd. It is John Bolton. Neocon under the Bush administration, was national security advisor under President Trump, took over from H.R. McMaster, and now not a big fan, I would say, of Donald Trump these days. So Bolton's speech garnered a little bit of attention, I would say. This is from the Lloyd's List, Tomer Renan over there. Why a U.S. withdrawal from the world stage would be bad for shipping. A diminished U.S. would usher in international disorder and instability, undermining the global order that has facilitated world trade since 1945, warns former National Security Advisor John Bolton. Now, one of the individuals who attended this did a great little list here where they went down everything that Bolton was talking about. He was obviously talking about Iran. He was talking about how Israel has changed the power balance in the Middle East. He talked about how the U.S. and the Great Britain have issues over Diego Garcia out in the Indian Ocean. Talked about the vulnerability of Taiwan and the outcome that's happening right now in Ukraine. Talked about China and its growing control over choke points. Although we just saw a story come out today about China giving up its influence in Panamanian port, issues about Europe standing up and where they're going to be. But I think Tomer really hits the heart of the matter, which is what is the U.S. policy going to be in regards to maintaining freedom of the seas? What we're seeing right now is a bifurcation on the world's oceans. The world's oceans are splitting. We're seeing the emergence of the parallel fleet, the dark fleet, the ghost fleet, the shadow fleet, whatever you want to call it, but a secondary fleet of commercial ships that are operating out of the mainstream of the developed nations' fleets. That will probably is not going to go away anytime soon, even if everything stops between Russia and Ukraine. The U.S. really has not been the guarantor of the world's oceans. They like to say that, but they really haven't done it. And you can make the argument that's not really their mission. It hasn't been their mission. Look at what's happened with the Houthi in the Red Sea. Yes, the U.S. has bombed the Houthi. Yes, the U.S. has a carrier strike group. The Truman just went through the Suez Canal after its collision north of Port Said. But it's not brought down the insurance rates to sail through the Red Sea. And more importantly, we haven't seen a resumption of trade through the Red Sea. And so, is the U.S. the protector? I know a lot of great analysts and historians who want to say that, but I also know some who are sitting there going, no, in many ways, the U.S. has not assumed that mantle, and it's really a world duty that the world hasn't picked up. And so what Bolton is saying, however, it's the U.S. It's the U.S. withdrawal from the world stage. And he sees Trump as really magnifying on that. All right. The next story here was the interview with Soren Toft. And Soren Toft, a really interesting player in global shipping, used to be the head over at Maersk, made the jump over to Mediterranean Shipping Company. He has led MSC into the dominant position it is in today, actually surpassed Maersk as the biggest ocean shipper in the world. Toft has had some really interesting strategies. One of them is buying every ship he can get his hand on. MSC is like buying ships left and right. It's one of the reasons why you see MSC ships always in the news, because they own so many damn ships. The MSC Baltic 3, for example, up in Newfoundland, is a good example of that. The other element is he took MSC out of the vessel sharing agreement with Maersk. Used to be the 2M alliance. That was the biggest alliance out there. Maersk is now in the Gemini cooperation with Hauppauge, whereas MSC is on their own. They have a little bit of vessel sharing agreement with ONE and Zim, but they're largely on their own, a standalone company, a behemoth of a company. And what Toft said was really, really interesting, and I think it deserves some attention here. So one of the stories here is out of Lloyd's List. This is a story by Rob Wilmington. Big variance to China-built boxship exposure for U.S. service providers. Some carriers are heavily exposed, MSC, to the risk of potential port taxes on Chinese-built ships. Several big container liner operators have limited exposure for existing vessel fleets. China has a 70% share of container ship new building order book. So again, if you haven't been following the story, under the proposed tariffs that are coming out, the U.S. Trade Representative has put forth a proposal that's open for comments right now to levy taxes and tariffs against Chinese-built ships coming into U.S. ports Every time they come in, they'll have to pay a fee anywhere from 1 to 1.5 million. And then even if you have Chinese built ships in your fleet, you would have to pay that. There is a large percentage of the Mediterranean shipping company fleet that is Chinese built. So MSC has a lot of exposure to this. And then we have this story over from Greg Miller, used to be at Freightways, but now at Lloyd's. If U.S. taxes Chinese ships, liners could pull capacity from U.S. ports. Now, this is what Soren Toft says. Toft said some vessel capacity serving the U.S. would shift to other trades if carriers cannot pass along proposed port fees to shippers. Now, the carriers are the ocean carriers. They're the big shipping companies. Shippers are those who ship the cargo. Europe, U.S. East Coast trade would be particularly hard hit. Goes on, higher port fees would cause carriers to cease services to secondary U.S. ports to reduce total charges per service string. And then finally, a reduced number of calls per service string would concentrate imports into the largest U.S. ports, leading to congestion at those gateways. All right, let's break this down because I think it's a really important part of what Toft said. So some capacity could shift other trades. All right, number one, you're not leaving the U.S. trade. Let's be clear about that. You're absolutely insane if you think that you're going to leave U.S. trade. There's nobody else who's going to pick that up. So the volume of cargo coming to the U.S., I don't see diminishing. Toft is in a bit of a position here because I would argue that MSC is very overexposed with overcapacity. They have been fine, and all the ocean carriers have been fine because of the diversion around Africa because of the Houthi. However, if the Red Sea opens back up again, everybody's going to be stuck with a lot of extra ships. And there's only going to be so much money you're going to be able to get for scrapping those ships as every container ship over 20 years of age heads to the beach in Bangladesh, India, and Pakistan. So I think that first point there is not exactly 100%. I do agree with the second half of it, but that the Europe and East Coast trade would be particularly hard hit. And the reason for that is if you look at West Coast trade, a lot of ships come into the U.S. West Coast may go to 1-2 ports, very rarely to go to 3. Because there's just not 3 ports on the West Coast. There's Seattle, Tacoma, there's Oakland, there's LA, Long Beach. That's it. And a lot of ships just go into LA and Long Beach. So you're only paying for the one. If you look at the East and Gulf Coast ports, it's a lot different. Ships come in and hit 3-4 ports at a time. Now, this is one of the reasons why automation wasn't as big of an issue on the East and Gulf Coast as it is on the West Coast, because you hit smaller ports. However, going to that second point, the higher port fees could cause carriers to cease services to some secondary ports. So this is a real danger to smaller ports on the East and Gulf Coast. You know, why go into Charleston? Why go into Boston? Why go into Philadelphia? Why go into Jacksonville, Tampa, Miami, and instead just hit the 3 big East and Gulf Coast ports? Go into New York, New Jersey, go into Savannah, go into Houston. That is a danger. And then that leads to the final port. If all of a sudden you start cutting out secondary ports and everyone starts funneling into just a couple of primary ports, you're going to get congestion. And the congestion is going to be formed because you're not going to be able to get the throughput, the containers out of the port. So this is a major concern, I would argue right now, that you're going to see funneling in. Now, they're not going to go into all those 3 ports. Some carriers will go into some other ports. So you may see Charleston, for example, pick up some of that cargo, Virginia, pick it up, Jacksonville, but you're going to see a kind of change in it. You're not going to get the 4-port service that maybe you're accustomed to on the East and Gulf Coast ports. Instead, what you may get is 2 ports. And that's going to be a big change. And that, I think, has the potential to have an impact on the delivery of goods into the U.S., causing delays and impacts on the supply chain side. The third story here, the container market downturn is creating a new era of volatility. I don't know what world these people have been living in, but it's been volatile in the container market since 2020. There has not been a year where the word volatility has not been used. All right, this story over at the Journal of Commerce, the container shipping market is poised to recede this year, and the downward cycle could be more severe than prior bear markets. A container market down cycle is already well underway, said Pasra Jain, global head of transport and logistic research at HSBC. This downturn could be worse than past downturns. Speaking during a panel session, Jan pointed to several factors that could provide fuel for the down cycle, including uneven demand growth globally, a worsening supply-demand imbalance, a hefty order book that is poised to exacerbate an already significant oversupply issue, and increased carrier war chests that could prolong price wars. It goes on here, in addition to overcapacity, uneven demand growth globally poses a global hurdle for the industry. While volumes to the Asia to North America trade grew 28% from 2019 to 2024, the North America-Asia lane shrunk 15%, and the Europe-Asia trade declined 23%. At the same time, shrinking consumer demand and increasingly aggressive tariffs pose a potential hurdle for the industry, according to Chris Rogers, the head of supply chain research at S&P. Quote, this likely to prove inflationary, which could start to hit consumers' spending in a way maybe we didn't see last time around. So this is going to be a mess. This is not anything that we should be surprised about. This story over at Lloyd's List by Shixin Shen, new trade war salvos offer rate respite before demand dives. So 3 points he makes here. Number one, proposed U.S. charges on ships built in China and its operators could force fleet shifts, creating a two-tiered market favoring non-Chinese vessels. I have to talk about this. One of the things we're already seeing is a bifurcation of the world fleet because of what's happening in Russia, Ukraine with sanctions, the dark fleet, the shadow fleet, whatever you want to call it. Now we may see a three-way split because you want to pull Chinese manufactured ships off the U.S. runs. That's going to be a big problem. And now what you would see is a trifurcation. I assume that's what we would call a three-way split. A trifurcation of the world fleet. This is just making the world fleet less productive, less economical, and less really usable for the consumers and the shippers. Second, tariffs and fees could raise freight rates, disrupt supply chains, and divert shipments to ports outside the U.S. Okay, I keep hearing this, like, oh, we'll go to Canada, we'll go to Mexico. All right, you can go to Canada, you can go to Mexico all you want. You still got to get in the U.S. You got to come across that border, and you just saw a 25% tariff go in over the border. So that may not work. Now, you may try to go through other ports, maybe transfer to the port down in Peru that China has set up, and come in through there in other ways. But again, one of the things that they're talking about, and the U.S. Trade Representative said in his report, is that they want to be able to track these containers coming from their origination, and so to charge them the true tariff, not where they're just recently coming from. In other words, the voyage before last. U.S. tariffs echo the 1930 Smoot-Hawley tariff. Yes! Smoot-Hawley Act tariff mention for historians. That's it. That's gold. That's gold right there. Smoot-Hawley, come on, that's a drink. I know we usually just do it for the Bob L. Mandab, but new rule here on what's going on with shipping. If we have Smoot-Hawley, you got to take a drink. So for those of you who don't know, Smoot-Hawley tariff was enacted after the Great Depression. That's kind of the thing that's missing in this backdrop, by the way. We're not in the midst of a Great Depression. They enacted that during the Great Depression to try to get manufacturing and job employment back in the United States. So there are a couple of key factors missing when you start talking about Smoot-Hawley here. However, let's go back to this. U.S. tariffs echo Smoot-Hawley, escalating trade risk, slowing global growth, and worsening demand outlook. Now, I got to say, worsening demand outlook, we are seeing peak demand right now in the U.S. We just had record profits reported by everybody, CMA, CGM, Costco, Maersk, everyone, HMM, Hauppauge, everybody's record profits. And that's brought to you by two things. Number one, the Houthi and making ships go around Africa. And second, a lot of kind of consternation and concern so that everybody is pushing freight forward. So we had a lot of cargo coming into the United States early, and that helped ease that. So the opening of TPM had to have been absolutely fascinating to watch. I think it would be just absolutely fantastic to not just get the perspective from those up there on the stage, but to talk to shippers and carriers and freight forwarders and NVOCs, non-vessel owner common carriers, basically Expedias of shipping, and everybody else involved in this. I think it would be really fascinating. I think if you are involved in this and you're not there, you're missing out on something because it is really key for you to be there. For me, providing the general, macro view from 50,000 feet, I can get that from reporting and from people's comments. I've been like eating up on LinkedIn, everybody's comments about it. So we're going to do a follow-up with this later this week, kind of wrap TPM up and see what else comes out of this. We've got a lot of other stories coming up. We just saw the United States finish up its resupply of McMurdo Station down in Antarctica. That's always a great story. I'm looking forward to doing that story. Just did an interview with Jennifer Parker about what's going on in shipping, kind of a What the Ship Australian edition. And then an interview with the commander of Military Sea Lift Command that I hope to have posted by this weekend or next week sometime. So just a lot going on with shipping. And since there's a lot going on with shipping, you know what you should do? You should subscribe and like to the channel so that you'll keep up to date with videos as they come available. You can give the channel a big thumbs up. You can share it across social media. And if you can support the page. How can you support the page? Well, you can hit that super thanks button down below where you can contribute directly to the page, or you go over to Patreon and become a monthly and yearly subscriber so that I can get $3,000 so I can go to TPM next year and go. I don't mean to beg for money, but man, that's an expensive conference. That's a lot of money to go to a conference. But it is worth it. Let me be clear. Everyone I know who attends the TPM conference are absolutely amazed. So, I mean, some good friends of the show are out there at TPM. Laura Began, the Maritime professor, Daniel Stanton, Mr. Supply Chain himself is out there. So I look forward to hearing reports from them about how the event was. I know I'm missing out on a great event, and I just need to get my butt out to Long Beach. Until our next episode, this is Sal, signing off.